second graders, it's time for another chapter of Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle's Magic. Today we're going to read chapter 6, and chapter 6 is really long, just like the other one. So this is going to be broken up into 4 different parts. Okay? So chapter 6, part 1, The Heedless Breaker. It was such a beautiful spring day. It had been dark and rainy in the morning when Sharon left the house for school, but now at 3:15 the sun was shining. There was a nice little springy breeze to send the clouds tumbling, and the big old peach tree in the Rogers front yard was covered with fat pink buds. Sharon Rogers said goodbye to her best friend, Mary Lou Robertson, banged open the front gate, and left it swinging, dropped her library book in the wet grass, and knelt down to hug her little dachshund Missy. Forgot about the library book, went running up to the front door, banged it open and shut, tossed her galoshes and raincoat onto the floor of the hall, dashed into the living room to kiss her mother, didn't notice that her mother had company and was drinking tea, grabbed her around the waist and began to a big bear hug, which sent the teacup flying across the room, where it hit a little table and broke into a dozen pieces, and it sprayed tea all over the rug. Mrs. Rogers sighed as she kissed Sharon and said, "Sharon, dear, please try to be more careful. I love to have you hug me, but won't you please look first to see if I have a cup of tea in my hands? Now say how do you do to Mrs. Green, and then run and get the dishcloth." Sharon's sweet little blue eyes filled with tears, and she said, "How do you do, Mrs. Green? Oh, Mother, I forgot. I'm so sorry." Her mother said, "I'm sure you are, dear. Now hurry and get the dishcloth before the tea dries and stains the rug." Sharon ran into the kitchen, and Mrs. Rogers sighed as she picked up the pieces of the broken cup. "This is the 11th cup Sharon has broken this week, to say nothing of the 7 plates, 4 vases, a blue sugar bowl, and a mirror shattered that week before." There was a splintering crash from the kitchen. Mrs. Rogers excused herself to Mrs. Green, and still carrying the pieces of the broken cup, hurried into the kitchen. She found Sharon sitting in the middle of the floor, surrounded by a broken spice jar and spilled spices. The little old spice cupboard, which Mrs. Rogers had inherited from her grandmother, was clinging to the wall by one nail, empty, with one of its fragile shelves splintered. Mrs. Rogers said, "What in the world happened?" "I thought I sent you for a dishcloth." Sharon said, "Well, the dishcloth was hanging on the little rack by the spice cupboard, and I was reaching up for it when I remembered that the hard candy you kept in there was high on the shelf. So I climbed up the stove and just put one foot on the spice cupboard, and I didn't know it would break. I'm sorry, Mother." Mrs. Rogers sighed as she reached for the dishcloth, still hanging on a little rack. She said, "Oh, Sharon, won't you please try to be more careful and not so heedless? Now pick up this mess and go up and change your clothes. Your cookies and milk are on the table." She took the dishcloth and went through the swinging door to the dining room. Sharon jumped to her feet, rushed over and grabbed the broom and began sweeping vigorously at the spilled spices, forgetting or not noticing that in her heedless hurry that the largest and fullest jar of spice had been one of the black pepper. Mrs. Rogers, coming through the swinging door to return the dishcloth and filled the teapot, caught a large broomful of pepper square in the face. "Achoo! Achoo! Achoo!" She sneezed as a teapot lid rattled, and Sharon continued to spread the pepper through the kitchen. "Pepper, be careful! Achoo! Achoo!" said Mrs. Rogers, rubbing her smarting eyes. Sharon stopped sweeping. "Pepper where?" She knelt down to look at the floor, carelessly letting go of the broom, which fell down and rapped poor Mrs. Rogers across the instep. "Ouch!" she yelled, bending down to rub her sore foot, as Sharon, who hadn't noticed that she had dropped the broom on her mother, grabbed a handful of pepper, and without looking, thrust it up over her shoulder and said, "Is it pepper, Mother?" Mrs. Rogers caught this handful of pepper right in the eye. She gave a yelp of pain, rushed to the sink, and began throwing cold water in her face. Sharon instantly said, "Oh, Mother, I didn't see you. I'm terribly sorry." Mrs. Rogers said, "Go upstairs before I lose my temper." "Well, you don't have to be cross about it," Sharon said, banging open the swinging door, which caught Mrs. Green, who was just coming out to see if she could help, between the eyes and knocked off her rimless spectacles. "Oh, heavens! What happened?" said Mrs. Green, who couldn't see without her spectacles. "Oh, I'm so sorry. Said Sharon, "did I hurt you?" She stepped forward, and there was a loud crunch. "Oh," said Sharon. "Look, I've stepped on something." Mrs. Green said, "Oh no, my glasses!" And Sharon said, "Oh yes," and began to cry. Mrs. Rogers, who was still at the sink trying to wash the pepper out of her eyes, called, "Sharon Rogers, ka-choo! Go, ka-choo! Ka-choo! Right, ka-choo! Up, ka-choo! Stairs, achoo! And stay there in your room, ka-choo!" Sharon went. Poor Mrs. Green knelt down and began fumbling around on the floor for her broken glasses. She was hoping there might be one glass, or perhaps a fairly good-sized piece of one glass, that she could hold up to her eyes so she could see to go home. She found the glasses at last, but they had been ground to dust by Sharon's heel. So Mrs. Rogers, her eyes red and swollen, and sneezing every 5 seconds, had to lead her friend home. Sharon, from her bedroom window, watched them all the way along the street through the spring afternoon, and it made her cry harder than ever because they looked like two feeble old ladies who had just been to a funeral. All right, so Sharon seems a little bit careless and clumsy about things. So we'll see what happens as we continue this story next time.